Hi there, and welcome to my channel. If you would please hit the subscribe button on your way in, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you like what you see, hit the like. It's free and it helps get me out in that algorithm. Alright, let's get on to today's topic. So here on this Throwback Thursday, I wanted to go over a case that was a throwback from way back in the day. And I wanted to do something that was out of Michigan, my state. So, as I was researching, I came upon this case that is very famous. And when we get done, you'll know exactly who this man is. This whole story started in July of 1967 when a young woman named Mary Flesher disappeared. She was a 19-year-old college student at EMU University, and she had taken an evening walk around near her apartment, and she was seen, now we're going to need to remember this, she was seen wearing an orange dress with white polka dots, and her roommate also said that this was what she was wearing when she left that night, and she remembered because she had really had to convince her to buy that dress in the first place. Because it wasn't her normal style. She was very studious, wasn't a partier, wasn't real flamboyant, and this dress made her look like Twiggy, though, and that's what the selling point was. So anyway, she's taking her walk, and a neighbor down the road named Greg Fournier, whom also eventually ended up writing a book called Terror in Ypsilanti about this story. Well, anyway, he lived nearby, and he spotted her as she was being catcalled by a man in a car, and said that this man screeched to a stop and seemed to be trying to get her in the car to take a ride, and she kept saying, no, I'm fine. He had stopped, he had gone around the block, he'd left, came back, put his car in front of her while she was still walking down the street and started bothering her again. Eventually getting frustrated and squealing off. And that was the last time that Mary Flesher was ever seen alive. About a month later, her body was found near LaForge and Geddes Roads. She'd been repeatedly stabbed in the chest, and police said that she had not been killed where her body was found. Due to the lack of blood evidence, it was obvious that she had been placed there, and state police, after investigating, had found that the killer had returned to the scene at least 3 times and moved her, but he'd also apparently mutilated her further each time that he came back. And these were veteran police officers on this, and they had all said that they had never, ever seen anything so horrific in their lives. Now everything goes quiet and there are no leads. And then almost a year to the day later, 20-year-old Joan Schell left her home on Emmett Street and walked a block over to a bus stop on Washtenaw Avenue. She missed the bus and decided to go hitchhiking to Ann Arbor. She was going to visit a boyfriend that she had. Her friend said that she got into the car with 3 young men. Now, Joan was never seen alive again. A few days later, her body was found off Earhart Road in Ann Arbor. In 1968, the neighborhood that's now standing there was just being built. Joan had 25 stab wounds when she was found. It was found that she, too, had been killed somewhere else and then dumped. Now fast forward to March 1969. Marilyn Skelton. She was a 16-year-old and was a rock and roll party girl. Her brother dropped her off at the Arborland Mall, but she wanted to get to her boyfriend's place in Ypsilanti. He was a drummer in a band. One of his bandmates, named Ed, was probably one of the last people to talk to her. Ed said that she had called him from the shopping center out on Washtenaw and needed a ride to their place. He didn't have a car, and he said, "I'm sorry, Marilyn, I can't come get you." That was the last time anyone had heard from Marilyn. And like Mary and Joan, she had also been killed somewhere else and her body dumped outside Ypsilanti. Unlike Mary and Joan, though, however, she was not stabbed to death. And she was dumped right on the side of the road. So he's getting confident now. He's not even worried about hiding where he's dumping these people. It was said that she was the most brutally murdered. He did unspeakable things to her. Even though she had been killed in a different manner, though she was dumped just yards from where Joan had been found. And Doug Harvey, who was a Washtenaw County sheriff at the time, recounted that this guy would always shove something up inside the victims. This was one of his calling cards. And Marilyn's body had been found violated with a large tree branch. Now that's not even the worst of it. His youngest victim was only in 8th grade. Her name was Dawn Bassam. She was just 13 and was last seen walking along railroad tracks as she took a shortcut home, and she never made it, unfortunately. Now this kind of hit home because this was something that reminded me of growing up, and I grew up by railroad tracks, and something that all of our parents always told us was do not ever walk the tracks. I know it's quicker, I know it's shorter, but don't do it. You don't know who's back there, you don't know who's walking along those lines, and it's just safer. Well, apparently there was a shortcut that Dawn used to often take. There was a shortcut back to her house, and she'd cut over railroad tracks, then there was her house. And she took that shortcut that night, and she was only a few hundred yards away from her home when she vanished. Sheriff Harvey, even as an old man, still remembers how heart-wrenching this was. He said this was a little girl. It tore us all apart and had an effect on all of us. Everyone who saw this was affected. A blogger had stated that at first it was college students being victimized and everybody was horrified at that. But then when he took a little girl, there was just beyond, like there was nothing that they ever could even fathom. Now, Washtenaw deputies searched miles between her abduction and where her body was found. They finally found her orange sweater and signs of a deadly struggle between Dawn and her killer. He took her to that abandoned house up on the Forge Road. She was in the basement of that house. They found glass in her elbows and knees. She had gotten out of there and had gotten across the yard and back toward the barn, and that's where she was attacked, and he ended her life. Both the house and the barn were abandoned buildings. Killer must have known no one would be there, and it was clear he knew the area. After the scene was cleared, the killer returned to the scene. Items including Dawn's missing earrings were found in the abandoned barn weeks after her murder. Let me also add, because I forgot, one of the ways that they identified Mary, the first victim, was again an article of clothing that was found off to the side from where that they found her, and it was the orange dress with the white polka dots, and that was how they knew. Now we come to June of 1969, and there's a woman named Alice Callum. She was a graduate student at the University of Michigan and was going to a birthday party in Ann Arbor. Someone reported seeing her on the back of a motorcycle leaving the Depot House, which was a club in Ann Arbor. The weather was perfect for a ride for the 22-year-old, but unfortunately this would be her last ride. Her neck was slit from ear to ear, I remember that. They found her out on Territorial Road, Sheriff Harvey said. The only thing there was a lone, abandoned barn. Just a few weeks later, on the other side of the country, 17-year-old Roxy Phillips was brutally killed in California. No one could have possibly connected the crimes at first. Remember, this is 1969. There's no big database, there's no connecting between officers, none of that. So Roxy was last seen returning from mailing a letter when a shiny cutlass pulled up to the curb and cut her off in Salinas, California. The car stood out because it had Michigan plates, and a witness saw this all unfold. There were 2 people that saw her in that car. The car also stood out because the driver pulled away screeching his tires and almost hit another driver. The woman in the car that was almost hit had seen that Roxy had a dress on. She described it as kind of a red dress with a floral print on it, which was what she was wearing. Roxy was found in Pecadero Canyon outside of Salinas. she had been beaten and strangled with the belt of that floral pattern dress and then dumped in the canyon. 10 days later, a freshman at EMU didn't return to her dorm for that night. That freshman was Karen Beineman. She had walked into a wig shop on Washtenaw Avenue in downtown Ypsi and made a comment that didn't sit well with the store owners. She said, "I've just done 2 things that I haven't done in my life. I'm buying a wig and I accepted a ride on a motorcycle with a stranger." That didn't sit right with the shop owner. And so as they left, she and her assistant stepped outside to watch the girl. They said that they saw a clean-cut young man sitting on a shiny Triumph motorcycle. When he noticed the women looking at him, he turned away. At the chocolate shop next door, the shopkeeper couldn't help but notice the nice-looking bike, and she watched as a young woman walked out and hopped on the back, sitting behind the man. It was Karen Beineman, and this was her last ride. Now, by July 23rd, 1969, everyone is panicked. There are 5 women in southeast Michigan that are dead, and a 6th is missing. 5 different police agencies frantically searched for Karen Sue Beineman on July 23rd. They combed the 100 square miles of side roads between Ann Arbor and Ypsi for the 18-year-old who was last seen getting on a motorcycle with a stranger in Ypsilanti. Karen was the latest girl in the 2-year stretch to go missing. There had been 6 before her, 5 in southeast Michigan and 1 in California, though that one was not connected at the time. All had been killed and then dumped on back roads. They were all shot, strangled, stabbed, or subjected to terrible acts. Almost all of them had been marred and mutilated. The whole town of Ypsilanti was in shock, and nobody wanted to really say anything or talk about it because they were suspecting that whoever this was lived or worked in that area, but they didn't know who it was. Now, by July, every Washtenaw County cop was issued a bolo, be on the lookout for the bike and the biker. Now, in comes a rookie cop for the Eastern Michigan University force named Larry Mathewson. And he remembered something about the day before. So he had said that he was on patrol the afternoon of 23rd of July and turned the corner down by Sill Hall on the campus, and there was John Collins. And he said, "I didn't even know his name at the time." Now, at the time, Larry was still a senior in college. He said he didn't know his name, but he recognized his face. So the two had played intramural football. Larry said that John was memorable because he was a great athlete. Now, on the day Karen disappeared, Larry said that he saw John sitting on a motorcycle flirting with pretty college girls. And Karen was the only one to get on the bike. Apparently, there were 7 other women that tried to get on the motorcycle before him, or before her, and Beineman was the one that actually was allowed to get on it. And soon it is found out that his name is John Norman Collins. The rookie asked one of the girls that he had saw flirting with Collins, Collins flirting back, to see if he was the same guy that drove off with Karen in downtown Ypsilanti. The girl asked him if he was in any trouble, and he said, "Not that I'm aware of, but if you had a picture, I could probably clear him." The girl gave him a picture, which she put into a photo lineup, and went to the chocolate shop and the wig shop to ask them if they had seen that picture. Upon showing the employees the picture, they all said, yes, that's him. Now, the next day, Karen was found by a doctor who had gone out to the end of his street to get the mail, and his wife looked down and said, "There's a body down there." Karen had been tortured before her death, beaten on the head and been strangled, and dumped off Riverside Drive. Her underwear had been inserted inside of her, which police said, again, was one of the killer's signatures. But they also found something unusual, more than 500 short-clipped blonde hairs. Now, there was nothing other than, the thought of the motorcycle and everything connecting Collins to any of these women. But he got messy. Now, fast forward to Corporal David Leake had just returned from vacation when he noticed things were amiss in the basement. Before they left for vacation, Leake's wife had given his kids haircuts in the basement, and the clippings were swept into neat piles when they left. but as Leek walked into the basement, he found a mess of the hair and there was blood on the basement floor. And it so happened that Karen had disappeared and was killed when Leek and his family were on vacation. But the home wasn't empty. His nephew had stayed at the home, John Norman Collins. And the three boys were all little white blonde-haired little boys. And that was the exact same color of the hairs that were found on Karen. Finally, some evidence that pointed to John Norman Collins. He was arrested on July 31st, 1969 for the murder of Karen Beineman. Now, even if there was any doubt that this was the killer, police had some help. California had an even better case on Collins, and they had the death penalty. Right after Alice Collins was killed in June 1969, Collins and friends took a road trip to Salinas, California. A few days he was in Southern California, 17-year-old Roxy Phillips disappeared. Now, she was known to have been walking down the street, mailed a letter a block away from her house, and the letter was mailed, so they know that she got that far. John picked her up and took off with her. Two people saw Roxy getting in that car that had Michigan plates. And also, before Collins had left the state, he saw a doctor for a case of poison oak. A few days later, Roxy was found. She'd been beaten and strangled and dumped in a patch of poison oak in the canyon. After his Michigan arrest, the car he drove to California was impounded, where they found some important evidence for the California murder. They took the car apart, and under one of the suites, a swatch of fabric, about the size of a dime, was the same pattern of the floral dress and the same weave that Roxy was wearing. Everything matched: the belt, that swatch, and it connected the California murders to the Michigan murders. Perfect. In 1970, John Collins was tried for the murder of Karen Beineman. On August 17, 1970, he was found guilty and ordered to life without parole in prison. And that is the story of how John Norman Collins was caught. Now, there is a little plot twist here. We've been talking a lot on the news and everywhere lately about Brian Kohlberger, another Coed killer. Okay, and that's what John Norman Collins was called, was the Coed killer. Now, I did some research, I read some articles, and I also watched a documentary on Discovery Plus. At the very beginning of the documentary, this woman comes on, and guess who it is? Katherine Ramsland, who's Brian Kohlberger's teacher. And she starts to talk about the very first victim, Mary, in this case. And she talks about who found her. And who found Mary were two young men walking down the road. They had seen this car, the description of this dark blue car with a gray-white top. And this was the Cutlass, I believe. They saw it pull up to the side of the road. They saw this man get out, and then they saw it take off, like squealing off. And they didn't know what was going on, but as they got closer to where he had been, they smelled this horrible smell. Now remember, Mary had been missing a month. And when they went back to see what he was doing back there, they found Mary. And again, she had been taken apart. It had been a month since she had been lost, so it wasn't real pleasant back there. Now guess who these two boys were? Apparently, these two young men were friends with Katherine Ramsland's brother. So, here we have Katherine Ramsland now tied, personally, to another serial killer's case. And that just wows me. I couldn't believe that. I had never heard that before. So, that is our Throwback Thursday case. And, man, how far forensics has come now. Have a great rest of your day, and until next time, Cutsy out.